Hello everyone. Welcome to Story Hub channel. Discover real stories of wife betrayals, shocking twists and turns and their secrets. Hit the subscribe button and get to our story. The storm outside was in full force, lightning streaking across the sky like sharp blades, each flash cutting through the night with a harsh electric energy. I was in the living room, doing my best to tune out the growling thunder and the relentless drumming of the rain against the window, when the mail was delivered. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just the usual bills and junk mail. But one envelope stood out. It wasn't uncommon for us to receive odd pieces of mail from time to time, but this one felt different. It was addressed to Rachel, my wife, with elegant, precise handwriting that seemed oddly familiar. The return address was from a lab I didn't recognize. As I reached for the envelope, my hands trembled slightly, curiosity pushing aside my initial hesitation to intrude. When I tore it open, the contents spilled onto my lap, a small, nondescript piece of paper. A paternity test result. My heart lurched. The test was marked confidential, but the bold lettering on the front sent a wave of nausea through me. Paternity test results. The words were hard to process as I quickly scanned them, but one thing was unmistakable. The test was for a child, and the name listed as the possible father wasn't mine. The paper seemed to blur as shock clouded my vision. I struggled to grasp what I was reading, my mind spinning in disbelief. The storm outside reflected the turmoil inside me. The wind howled, rattling the windows as if it too wanted to break in and share in my horror. I could hardly catch my breath, each inhale coming out as a shallow, ragged gasp. My thoughts raced, colliding with one another as I desperately tried to make sense of this unwelcome revelation in our lives. I knew I had to confront Rachel. The weight of what I had just uncovered hit me, and I realized this was far beyond a simple misunderstanding. This was a betrayal on a scale I could barely comprehend. I could only hope that when I confronted her, she'd have an explanation. A reason that could somehow make sense of this twisted situation. But deep down, I feared no explanation could ever undo the damage this revelation had caused. The storm outside seemed to intensify, echoing the storm within me as I braced myself for the confrontation that awaited. The rain pounded relentlessly, matching the rapid thudding of my heart. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter as if it might somehow steady me against the storm of emotions raging inside. Rachel had just walked in, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the kitchen light. She looked exhausted, her features worn from a long day. But the moment her eyes landed on the envelope sitting on the counter, her expression shifted to one of confusion. "What's this?" she asked, a note of irritation in her voice as she reached for the envelope. Her eyes widened as she took in the contents, the paternity test results. I could hardly look her in the eye, my hands trembling as I fought to keep myself composed. "Rachel, we need to talk," I said, my voice betraying the tight knot of fear and anger that was lodged deep in my throat. She looked up, her eyes narrowing as she picked up on the seriousness of my tone and the weight of the situation. "What's going on?" "I found this in the mail," I replied, nodding toward the envelope. "It's addressed to you. It's a paternity test." Her face paled, and she took a step back, gripping the envelope as if it could somehow protect her from the confrontation that was about to unfold. I didn't know how to tell you," she stammered. "There's something I need to explain." "Explain?" I echoed, my voice edged with disbelief. "How do you even begin to explain something like this, Rachel? The test results clearly show that the child you're carrying isn't mine. It belongs to someone else." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Rachel's eyes welled up with tears, and though she tried to speak, the words seemed stuck in her throat. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and began to talk, her voice trembling. "I've been having an affair," she confessed, her gaze dropping to the floor. "For the past year, I've been involved with someone else. I'm sorry, I just didn't know how to tell you." Her admission struck me like a physical blow. I staggered back, my mind racing to grasp the enormity of her betrayal. "Who is it?" I demanded, my voice raw. Rachel hesitated, tears streaming down her face now. "It's someone you know. Someone close to you," she whispered, barely audible. "Who?" I pressed, my patience quickly eroding. "It's Matt," she said, her voice so low it was almost a whisper. "Your brother." The world seemed to spin off its axis, and I clutched the edge of the counter for support. "Matt, My brother, my own flesh and blood, was the father of the child Rachel was carrying. The realization was like a knife twisting in my gut, the pain and betrayal overwhelming. How could you do this? I managed to choke out. And how could he? How could you both do this to me? Rachel's sobs filled the room, but they did nothing to soothe the storm of anger and hurt raging inside me. The trust I had placed in both her and my brother was shattered beyond repair. I felt completely lost, betrayed not just by my wife but by my own family. I never meant to hurt you, Rachel said, her voice breaking with guilt. I thought I could keep it a secret. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. I couldn't respond, words failing me. The room seemed to spin around me as I struggled to process the depth of the betrayal. All I could think about was the life I believed I had, now utterly destroyed. The silence that followed Rachel's confession was thick and suffocating, broken only by the relentless sound of rain hammering against the windows. I stood there in the kitchen, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Matt, my brother, was the father of the child Rachel was carrying. The realization hit me like a freight train, leaving me unable to think straight. I need to see him, I finally said, my voice cold and steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I need to hear it straight from him. Rachel nodded, her face pale and streaked with tears. I'll call him, she said, her voice shaking. She picked up her phone and dialed Matt's number, her hand trembling as she held it to her ear. I watched her as she spoke, her words so quiet I could barely make them out. Matt arrived about an hour later, the tension in the house so thick you could cut it with a knife. He walked in, his face a mix of guilt and apprehension. The moment he saw me, his expression shifted to one of deep anguish and regret. He seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation all too well. Hey, man, Matt said quietly, his voice heavy with sorrow. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to fix this. I cut him off, my tone sharp. I'm not interested in excuses. Just tell me why. Matt let out a deep sigh, running a hand through his hair. It started as a mistake, he admitted, his voice cracking. I never intended for things to get this complicated. Rachel and we started seeing each other, and it just spiraled out of control. I never imagined it would come to this. I could barely contain the fury boiling inside me. You didn't think? I snapped. You didn't think about how this would destroy me? About the fact that you were betraying your own brother? Matt looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I know, he muttered. I'm sorry. I should have put an end to it before it got this far. His words hung heavy in the air. The betrayal wasn't just from Rachel, but from Matt, the one person who was supposed to have my back, the one person I trusted completely. That trust was shattered, and I couldn't see how it could ever be restored. You know, Matt, I said, my voice breaking. I thought we were family. I thought we were supposed to look out for each other. And now you've taken everything that mattered to me and thrown it away. Matt's eyes were filled with remorse, but his apology did little to ease the searing pain. I'm truly sorry. I know there's nothing I can say to make this right, but I hope, in time, you might find it in your heart to forgive me. Forgiveness seemed like a distant, unattainable concept, far removed from the agony I was feeling. The reality was that nothing would ever be the same. My relationship with Rachel was beyond saving, and the bond I had with Matt was broken beyond repair. As Matt walked out of the house, I was overwhelmed by a profound sense of loss. The family and life I once knew were now tainted by betrayal and heartbreak. Rachel and I were left standing in the wreckage of what used to be a stable, loving relationship, and I had no idea how to move forward from this shattered reality. In the days that followed, the house felt emptier than ever before. The walls seemed to close in around me, amplifying the silence that filled every room. Rachel and I had barely spoken since that confrontation, and when we did, our conversations were strained, weighed down by unspoken pain. The storm that had raged outside might have passed, but inside, the emotional tempest was far from over. I spent most of my days alone, wrestling with the aftermath of the revelation. The weight of the betrayal bore down on me, and every corner of the house seemed to echo with memories of happier times. I found myself wandering from room to room, unable to focus on anything, unable to find comfort in the familiar surroundings that now felt so foreign. One evening, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the paternity test results that lay before me. The paper seemed to mock me, a stark reminder of the lies and deceit that had turned my life upside down. I ran my fingers along the edge of the envelope, still struggling to grasp the full extent of what had happened. Rachel walked in, her face tired and worn. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded, too drained to put up a fight. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. She sat down, her eyes darting nervously. "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I want to explain more. I need you to understand why it happened." I leaned forward, my face a mix of anger and resignation. "I don't think there's anything you can say that will make me understand or forgive what's happened, Rachel." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know, but I owe you an explanation. The affair, it wasn't just about physical attraction. It was more about how I felt emotionally. I felt like we were growing apart, like you didn't see me anymore. Matt was there, and he made me feel valued, noticed." Her words felt like a knife twisting deeper into an already open wound. "So this was about feeling valued," I replied bitterly. "You didn't consider that betraying me, your husband, would have consequences?" "I wasn't thinking clearly," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I was selfish and made a terrible mistake. I never wanted to hurt you, but I let things spiral out of control." I leaned back, my head spinning with a mix of emotions. "And now? What do we do now? Where do we go from here?" Rachel's shoulders sagged, and she looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends, but I understand if you can't ever forgive me. I just want you to know that I'm sorry, and I'll always be here to support the child, even if it means stepping away from our marriage." Her words felt empty, and though I could see the desperation in her eyes, the damage was already done. The trust we once had was shattered, replaced by a chasm of betrayal and hurt that seemed impossible to bridge. "I need time," I said, my voice barely audible. "I need time to figure out what to do next. I can't make any decisions right now." Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here if you want to talk or need anything." As she left the room, I was once again left alone with my thoughts. The emotional wreckage was overwhelming, and the future felt uncertain. I knew I had to find a way to rebuild my life, but I had no idea where to begin. The betrayal had shattered my sense of security and trust, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a life that had been irrevocably altered. Days turned into weeks, each one blurring into the next as I struggled to come to terms with this new reality. The house, which once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed more like a prison. I found it nearly impossible to focus on anything beyond the constant ache of betrayal and confusion. The pain was so pervasive that imagining a life beyond the current turmoil felt impossible. One afternoon, I received a call from a lawyer's office. The message was brief. A meeting had been scheduled to discuss the legal aspects of our impending divorce and the division of assets. I had been avoiding dealing with these matters, clinging to a faint hope that things might somehow improve, but it was clear that I needed to face the inevitable. When the day of the meeting arrived, I drove to the lawyer's office with a heavy heart. The drive was a blur, my thoughts consumed by everything that had happened. I parked and walked into the building, a sense of numbness settling over me. Inside, the lawyer greeted me with a somber expression. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming," she said, extending her hand. "I know this is a difficult time for you." I shook her hand, my mind racing with questions. "Yes, thank you for meeting with me. I suppose we should get started." She nodded and led me into her office, where we sat down at a large desk covered with documents. "First, let's go over the assets and liabilities that need to be addressed," she said, opening a file. "We'll need to determine how to divide everything fairly." As we went through the paperwork, my mind kept drifting to the child Rachel was carrying. The realization that Matt was the father added another layer of complexity to an already painful situation. How would this impact everything moving forward? How could I reconcile the fact that the child was both my niece or nephew and a product of the betrayal that had shattered my world? The lawyer continued to discuss various legal aspects, but I struggled to concentrate. The emotional weight of the situation made it difficult to focus on the practical matters at hand. "What about custody of the child?" I asked, my voice heavy with the strain of the past few weeks. That's a significant issue, the lawyer replied. Given the circumstances, it's important to address this carefully. You'll need to consider the child's best interests and what arrangements will be in place for their future. The discussion about custody brought back painful memories of Rachel and Matt. The thought of dealing with them in a legal capacity was daunting, but I knew I had to confront these issues head-on. I took a deep breath and nodded, determined to navigate this painful process with as much dignity as I could muster. After the meeting, I made my way back to the car, feeling a mix of exhaustion and resignation. The legal proceedings were just one part of the journey ahead, and the idea of emotional healing seemed like a distant, almost unreachable goal. I knew I needed to talk to Rachel again, but this time, it was about more than just trying to understand her betrayal. It was about figuring out the future. When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me. Her eyes were red, and it was clear she had been crying. "How did it go?" she asked softly, her voice filled with apprehension. "It went," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "There's a lot to sort out, but we're moving forward." Rachel nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know this is incredibly hard for you, and I'm truly sorry for everything. I want to do what's best for everyone, especially the child. If there's anything I can do to make this easier, please let me know." Her words were sincere, but they did little to ease the turmoil raging inside me. The process of untangling our lives had just begun, and the road ahead was filled with emotional and legal challenges. As I looked at her, I realized that despite the pain, we had to find a way to navigate this new reality and figure out how to move forward with our lives, no matter how difficult it might be. As the days grew colder and autumn settled in, the chill seemed to take up residence in my heart as well. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and the weight of betrayal felt heavier with each passing day. The house, which once felt like a warm and welcoming home, now seemed like a cold, empty cavern, echoing with memories of a past that felt distant and almost unreachable. One evening, as I was sifting through some old family photographs, searching for a shred of normalcy in the midst of the chaos, I came across a photo album that had been tucked away on a high shelf. I hadn't looked at these pictures in years, but something compelled me to revisit them. The photos captured snapshots of happier times, Rachel and I at various family gatherings, smiling faces, and moments of genuine joy. As I flipped through the pages, each image felt like a painful reminder of what had been lost. I paused on a picture of Matt and me at a family barbecue, our arms around each other, both of us smiling broadly. The contrast between that day and the situation we now faced was stark. The memory of that day was bittersweet, overshadowed by the betrayal that had since unfolded. The sound of the doorbell startled me, pulling me from my thoughts. I went to answer it, and there stood Matt, his face etched with deep lines of remorse and anxiety. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I hesitated, torn between the urge to slam the door in his face and the curiosity to hear what he had to say. After a moment, I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. We moved into the living room, and he sat on the edge of the couch, his posture rigid and uneasy. "Thanks for seeing me," Matt said, his eyes sweeping over the room, taking in the photographs on the walls and the memories they held. "I know things have been rough, and I wanted to talk to you, to try and make amends." I sat down across from him, my gaze locked on his face. "Make amends? After everything that's happened? Do you really think that's possible?" I asked, my voice edged with bitterness. "What could you possibly say that would make any difference now?" Matt took a deep breath, his hands tightly clasped together. "I know I can't undo the past or fix what's been broken, but I wanted to apologize. I wanted to explain why things unfolded the way they did." I leaned forward, my patience running thin. "You've had plenty of time to explain, Matt. But go ahead. What's your excuse this time?" He looked down, his eyes clouded with regret and sorrow. It started gradually. Rachel and I, we had this connection, something that felt real and intense. I thought I could handle it, that it wouldn't affect our family. But I was wrong. I got caught up in something I should never have allowed to happen. "Caught up?" I echoed, my frustration boiling over. "This wasn't some fleeting mistake, Matt. This was a deliberate betrayal, not just to me, but to our entire family. Matt's shoulders slumped. I know, and I'm sorry. I never intended for things to turn out like this. I was selfish and foolish, and I let my own desires blind me to the consequences. The room was heavy with silence, and though I could see the pain in Matt's eyes, no amount of remorse could erase the betrayal. Do you even grasp the full impact of what you've done? I asked, my voice trembling. The trust that's been shattered? The relationships that have been destroyed? Matt nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. I do. And I'm so sorry for all the pain I've caused. I want to make things right. But I know that might be impossible. As we sat in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had once been filled with love and trust, I struggled to come to terms with the depth of the betrayal. The emotional scars were deep, and the road to healing seemed overwhelming. I don't know how to move forward from here, I said quietly. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, or if I can ever trust you again. Matt's expression was filled with profound sadness. I understand. I know it's going to take time, if it happens at all. I just hope that someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. As he left, I was once again left alone with my thoughts. The betrayal had left a gaping wound that seemed impossible to heal. The future felt uncertain, and the road ahead was filled with challenges. I knew I had to find a way to navigate this new reality, but the emotional weight of the situation made it feel like an insurmountable task. The journey to rebuild my life and find some semblance of peace was just beginning, and the path ahead was fraught with pain and uncertainty. In the weeks following Matt's visit, life felt like an endless cycle of negotiations and emotional turmoil. Each day was a struggle to maintain some semblance of normalcy, while constantly grappling with the deep sense of betrayal that had become my constant companion. Rachel and I continued to navigate the legal and emotional complexities of our situation. Our conversations were mostly about practical matters, how to divide our assets, the arrangements for the child, and the logistics of our impending separation. It was a stark contrast to the emotional closeness we once shared. The love that had once bound us together seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the harsh reality we now faced. One evening, as I sat at the dining table reviewing financial documents, Rachel walked in, her face pale and drawn. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quiet and tense. I looked up from the papers, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "About what?" She took a deep breath and sat down across from me. "About the future and the decisions we need to make regarding the child." I nodded, feeling a sense of dread creeping in. "What about the future?" Rachel hesitated, then spoke with a mix of resignation and determination. "I've been thinking a lot about what's best for the child, and I've come to realize that we need to be honest about our situation. This isn't just about dividing assets or handling legal matters. It's about the kind of future we're creating for this child." Her words struck a chord. The idea of bringing a child into this fractured situation felt both heartbreaking and overwhelming. "What are you suggesting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think we need to establish a clear plan," Rachel said. "We have to make sure the child's needs are met, regardless of what happens between us. I want to ensure that this child has a stable environment and that we both take responsibility." I looked at her, feeling a pang of sadness. "I agree that the child's well-being should be our top priority, but how do we do that, given everything that's happened?" Rachel reached across the table and took my hand. "We need to work together, even if it's difficult. We have to set aside our personal grievances and focus on what's best for the child. I know it's hard, but this is about more than just us." Her gesture was a faint reminder of the connection we once had, but it felt distant and strained. "I understand what you're saying," I replied, gently pulling my hand away. "But I still need time to process everything. The betrayal, the loss, it's all still very raw." "I know," Rachel said softly. "I'm struggling with it too. But we have to be strong for the child. We need to show that we can put our differences aside for their sake." The conversation left me feeling emotionally drained. I knew Rachel was right. We had to think about the future, but the weight of the betrayal made it hard to focus on anything beyond the immediate pain. In the days that followed, I began taking practical steps to separate our lives. I moved my personal belongings into a spare room, started the process of closing our joint accounts, and consulted with legal advisors about dividing our assets. Each action felt like a step further away from the life I had once known. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, I came across a box labeled Memories. Inside were old letters, keepsakes, and mementos from happier times. I pulled out a letter from Rachel that she had written to me on our anniversary years ago. It was filled with love and promises for the future, and reading it brought a fresh wave of pain. I sat on the attic floor, clutching the letter, overwhelmed by a profound sense of loss. The dreams we had once shared seemed so distant now, replaced by a reality that was harsh and unforgiving. The future felt uncertain, and the emotional scars from the betrayal were still very much raw. As I stared at the letter, I realized I needed to find a way to move forward, even if it meant accepting that the past could never be fully reclaimed. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but I had to navigate it with as much strength and grace as I could muster. The decision to move forward was not just about the legalities and logistics. It was about coming to terms with the emotional fallout and finding a way to rebuild my life. It was a bitter realization, but one that was necessary for my own healing and for the future of the child that Rachel and I would both have to support. As autumn progressed, the cold set in, and the emotional chill that had settled over me seemed to deepen with each passing day. The process of separating our lives was well underway, and every step forward felt like a step away from everything that had once defined my sense of stability and happiness. Rachel and I continued to communicate, mostly through our lawyers, making the situation feel even more impersonal and detached. One Saturday morning, while I was packing up the last of my belongings from our shared bedroom, I received an unexpected visit. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, I was surprised to see Matt standing there, holding a small box. "Hey, can I come in?" he asked, his face a mix of apprehension and determination. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face him again, but the sight of the box, something tangible and personal, made me nod and step aside. Matt entered and looked around the room, taking in the boxes and the disarray. "I didn't realize you were still packing," he said quietly. "I thought maybe we could talk." I motioned for him to sit on the edge of the bed, and he placed the box between us. "What's this?" I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. "It's something I wanted to give you," Matt said. "It's not much, but I thought it might help us close this chapter." I opened the box and found a collection of old photographs and mementos, items from our childhood, family gatherings, and moments shared between Matt and me. There were pictures of us with our parents, snapshots from holidays, and even some handwritten notes we had exchanged as kids. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked, my voice tinged with a mix of confusion and sadness. Matt sighed deeply, his eyes reflecting a blend of regret and nostalgia. "I thought it might remind us of the good times we had before everything went wrong. I wanted you to know that despite everything, I haven't forgotten the bond we shared." The gesture was both touching and painful. Seeing those memories brought back a flood of emotions, fondness for the times we had shared, and deep sorrow for how things had unraveled. "I appreciate the gesture," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But it doesn't change what's happened. It doesn't undo the betrayal." Matt nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I know, and I'm not expecting it to. I just wanted you to know that I'm deeply sorry for everything. I've messed up, and I've lost something precious." We sat in silence, the weight of the past hanging heavy in the air. The photographs and mementos were a stark reminder of what had been lost: innocence, trust, and the bond that had once been so strong. "I've been trying to come to terms with everything," I finally said. "It's been hard to accept that the past is gone, and that our relationships have changed so drastically." Matt looked at me with profound sadness in his eyes. "I wish things could be different. I wish I could turn back time and undo the damage I've caused, but I know that's impossible." As we spoke, I realized that while the past couldn't be reclaimed, there was an opportunity to find a path forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was crucial to focus on healing and rebuilding my life. "Thank you for bringing the box," I said, standing up and offering a small, genuine smile. "It means a lot, even if it doesn't change things. I need to focus on moving forward and finding a way to rebuild." Matt stood as well, nodding in understanding. I get it. I hope you can find some peace and, eventually, maybe even forgiveness. If you ever need anything, I'm here. As Matt left, I was alone again, surrounded by memories and the reality of my situation. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I knew it was necessary to face it with as much strength and resolve as I could muster. The past was a collection of cherished memories and painful lessons, and it was up to me to navigate the future one step at a time. As November gave way to December, the first signs of winter began to show. The air outside was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within me. The separation process was ongoing, but I had started to focus on rebuilding my life and finding a way to move forward despite the emotional challenges. I tried to find some solace in small routines, going to the gym, reading, and spending time with close friends. One chilly afternoon, as I was organizing the remaining boxes in the garage, the doorbell rang. I was surprised to see Rachel standing there, her face slightly flushed from the cold, and her eyes holding a look of determination. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice steady despite the visible strain. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded and motioned for her to come inside. We moved to the living room where we sat down across from each other. The atmosphere was tense, the silence between us a stark reminder of the emotional distance that had grown over the past few months. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Rachel took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've come to a decision. I want to propose something to you, something that I believe could help us both find some peace." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "A proposal? What kind of proposal?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a document, and she handed it to me. "It's a proposal for an amicable separation and a parenting plan. I've included details on how we can co-parent the child in a way that minimizes conflict and provides stability." I glanced over the document, noticing the carefully outlined plans for shared custody and financial support. Rachel had clearly put a lot of thought into it, and the level of detail was both impressive and surprising. "I appreciate the effort you've put into this," I said, looking up from the document. "But why now? Why the sudden push for an agreement?" Rachel looked at me with a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "I've realized that the only way for us to move forward is to establish a clear path for the future. I want us to work together, not just for the child's sake, but for our own peace of mind. I want to ensure that we can coexist in a way that's respectful and considerate of each other's needs." Her words resonated with me, but there was a lingering sense of skepticism. And what about everything that's happened? The betrayal, the hurt. It's all still very fresh. "I know," Rachel said softly, "but I believe that by focusing on a concrete plan for the future, we can start to heal. It's not about forgetting the past, but about finding a way to navigate it with dignity and respect." I studied the document again, noting the thoughtful provisions for the child's well-being and the attempts to address our financial and emotional needs. The proposal was more than just a legal agreement. It was an effort to rebuild some form of order and stability. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll review this more thoroughly. I need to think about it and discuss it with my lawyer, but I appreciate that you're trying to make things easier." Rachel nodded, relief evident on her face. "Thank you. I really hope we can find a way to make this work." As she left, I was left alone with my thoughts. The proposal was a step toward a new reality. A reality where Rachel and I would have to coexist as co-parents rather than partners. The path to healing was still uncertain, but the effort to create a clear plan offered a glimmer of hope. The next few weeks were filled with meetings with my lawyer and careful consideration of the proposal. It was clear that while the emotional wounds would take time to heal, the practical steps we were taking now would lay the groundwork for our future interactions. Navigating the complexities of our new relationship was daunting, but I resolved to approach it with as much patience and grace as I could muster. The journey ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but the steps we were taking now were crucial for building a foundation of stability and respect, both for the child and for ourselves. As the new year approached, the air was thick with a mix of hope and apprehension. The process of untangling our lives was nearing its end, and the focus had shifted from the immediate pain of betrayal to the future that lay ahead. Rachel and I had reached an agreement on the separation and the parenting plan, and while the past couldn't be changed, the new year offered a chance to start fresh. The day before New Year's Eve, I sat in my new apartment, a modest but comfortable space I had recently moved into. The room was still sparsely furnished, with a few personal touches to make it feel like home. I was working on sorting through some old photos and mementos, trying to find a sense of closure and acceptance. My phone buzzed, and I saw a text from Rachel. "I hope you're doing okay. I wanted to thank you again for working with me on the plan. I hope we can start this new chapter with some semblance of peace." I stared at the message for a moment, reflecting on the tumultuous journey we had been through. I typed a reply. "Thank you. I'm trying to focus on moving forward. I hope we can both find a way to heal and start fresh." As I put my phone down, there was a knock at the door. To my surprise, Matt was standing there, holding a small gift-wrapped box. "Hey," he said, looking both nervous and hopeful. "I know things are still rough, but I wanted to give you something for the new year." I gestured for him to come in, and we moved to the living room. Matt handed me the box, and I opened it to find a framed photo of the two of us from years ago. A snapshot of a simpler time, filled with laughter and camaraderie. "I thought you might like this," Matt said. "It's a reminder of better times, and I wanted to give it to you as a gesture of goodwill." I looked at the photo, feeling a wave of nostalgia and sadness. "Thank you, Matt. It means a lot, even though things have changed so much." Matt nodded, his expression somber. "I'm truly sorry for everything that's happened. I hope you can find some peace, and that we can all move forward with a sense of understanding and respect." We shared a moment of silence, the weight of the past still lingering but softened by a sense of resolution. It was a small gesture, but it symbolized a step toward healing and acceptance. As the evening approached, I prepared to celebrate New Year's Eve alone. I had planned a quiet night of reflection and contemplation. I made myself a simple meal, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle against the dark sky. When the clock struck midnight, I raised my glass in a toast to the new year. It was a moment of both reflection and anticipation. The past year had been filled with pain and upheaval, but it had also been a year of growth and resilience. The challenges I had faced had made me stronger, and I was determined to approach the future with a renewed sense of hope. The following morning, I received a call from Rachel. "Happy New Year," she said, her voice gentle. "I wanted to wish you well and let you know that I'm hopeful for what lies ahead." "Happy New Year," I replied. "I'm hopeful too. Let's make this year about moving forward and finding peace." As we spoke, I felt a sense of closure beginning to take shape. The past year had been marked by betrayal and heartbreak, but it had also been a period of profound personal growth. The path to healing was still ongoing, but the new year represented a chance to build a new beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with moments of reflection and adjustment. But I was ready to embrace it, armed with the lessons learned and the strength gained from overcoming adversity. The future was uncertain, but it held the promise of new opportunities and the potential for healing. As I looked out at the brightening horizon, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. The new year was a blank slate, and I was ready to write the next chapter of my life with resilience and optimism.